August 2023, Nasty NECKFACE presents NECKFACE in New York, a video by Angel and Z Radio, now available on our Patreon. The full video features NECKFACE bombing Manhattan from daytime to nighttime in an absolutely brutalizing fashion during the summer of 2023. NECKFACE in New York documents NECKFACE's violent graffiti campaign through Midtown and the Lower East Side, now available on our Patreon. We've also released an episode onto our Patreon with King Baby. The full episode runs 1 hour long as King Baby speaks on homelessness, living in a walk-in closet in San Francisco, graffiti in New York City, music, life problems, and more. Lastly, we're releasing an extremely limited surprise bonus product with Set KRT. It will be released later in the month of August and will be sent to our Patreon members on a first-come first-served basis. NECKFACE in New York, King Baby episode and limited Set KRT product are available for the month of August 2023 through our Patreon. Members gain access to our episode and content library, with interviews, documentary-style videos, bombing projects, and more. Including projects from Jedi 5, Rehab Iraq, Ichabod the Rail God, zines, art prints, Living Proof magazine, All We Got Is S2 and much more.
Angel and Z Radio is a show brought to you by the wonderful people at Art Primo. A graffiti shop like no other that has been proudly serving the community for decades from New York to Seattle and beyond. They have everything you need, and you probably need everything they have. Mops, paint, inks, sketchbooks, stickers, bags, and much, much more. Believe me, you will not want to miss this. artprimo.com.
So that's actually something that I want to get into. I guess like your different stages of life, from doing like research on you and just knowing about you and your life and your path as a graffiti writer, your path as an artist, and just as a human being. Like, it's clear that you've had several phases in life, as a lot of people do. And one of the things that I wanted to start speaking on was the health scare that you had in 2011, where at the time they thought you had a stroke, and that you were partially paralyzed on the left side of your body, but you were living a pretty healthy life during this time period. You were drug and alcohol free for 15 years, and you had a pretty clean diet. You were like vegan at the time. And like undergoing this was kind of just a lesson on your own mortality and making you realize like, oh, wow, we're really not invincible. Because as younger people, like you said, you were just like running on fumes, writing graffiti, living this kind of like whatever lifestyle. So I guess I wanted to start it off by asking you what exactly happened there, and how did that just influence your life going forward?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was like really one of the most consequential things to happen to me really in my whole life. It really shaped the way I've lived my life from then. I really was one of those people that thought I had it all together. Like I really understood kind of everything, in my own mind. And, like my attitude to kind of health and kind of obviously abstaining from drugs and alcohol since the age of 17, it did come as a shock. But when I look back, maybe not as shocking as I kind of thought at the time, because as you say, I didn't really function on very much. I've always functioned on very little sleep. And I've learned like in time that sleep is kind of one of the most important things. Like you really can't like lose sleep, it really impacts your health, in such a major way. Sleep deprivation, stress was the other thing. There's a lot going on in my life. A lot of things I was very paranoid about every day. Particularly like a lot of the consequences, for painting graffiti actively, financial stress, like just living this lifestyle and never knowing, where my next paycheck will come from, and if I was going to make rent or, be able to eat well and all that sort of thing. So, there was a lot definitely on my shoulders, and yeah, definitely financial stress even beyond that, like being somebody that lived outside of the system and just not really being on top of my taxes, and all of that was catching up with me. So, I look back and I'm like, yeah, I was going to the gym every day and running all the time and doing yoga and eating vegan and like not doing drugs and alcohol and all of that. But to say that there wasn't like, that there weren't, you know, things contributing to that, you know, that I guess now I realize that's a sort of a naive standpoint. So I was just walking to the studio one day, you know, it was like the first time I'd had a sleep in a while. And I caught a train into the city from West Auckland, where I was living at the time. And I went to my favorite vegan spot, and I had a scrambled tofu thing for breakfast that I like, and I had a couple of espressos, and then I was like walking to the studio in this bang, just like a popping sensation in my right temple. And then that was followed by like the worst headache like I'd ever felt in my life. And I got like maybe 3 or 4 blocks from where that had happened, and I collapsed on a bus stop. Like I tried to sit down on a bus stop seat, and I slumped right off and fell on the ground. And people, I do remember like people walking just straight over me and walking past, and no one was asking me what was up. They were probably just assuming the worst, except for one guy who sort of within a few minutes ran across from the other side of the road. He was a medical student. And, you know, he asked me, you know, are you on drugs and alcohol? And I was like, no. I don't think I could even talk properly. I was like slurring, and then he was like, hey, don't worry, just chill. I got an ambulance on the way. And then next thing I was off to the hospital, and I had a CAT scan where something came up. So then it was like 2 MRIs, and then I had over the course of the next couple of days, like an ECG, you know, where they put the camera down to have a look at the back of your heart and everything. I had a lumbar puncture, you know, so they could see if my brain was bleeding, like everything, because they realized like quite quickly that it wasn't a stroke. Like they put me in the stroke ward, and that was pretty scary. Actually, like coincidentally, one of my school friends' father was in the bed right next to me, and he had woken up that morning and couldn't talk. Like just woke up one day, like went to bed the night before he could talk, woke up the next day he could no longer talk, like from a stroke. Like so it was like mentally kind of like preparing myself for what life post-stroke would look like. And then I started to kind of like heal, you know, like I was bouncing back. And so that hence why they gave me a second MRI. And it looked as if like pretty much like whatever had happened was like a temporary thing. So what it was a blood vessel in my right frontal lobe just constricted momentarily, and stop the flow of blood to the left side of my body, and partially paralyzed me. And I was like, probably, I always tell people about 95% better within like a couple of days. But that last 5%, you know, it was a good 2 years of kind of getting my health back to something that seemed normal. And funnily enough, a big part of that returning to normal health was relaxing on some of the, you know, strict regime that I was sort of living by at that time, you know, relaxing my diet a little, you know, being okay to drink a few beers casually, you know, with people with a meal, and, you know, at the end of a long work day, like learning how to unwind and not be so uptight, you know.
Wow, that's really nuts, man, because you know, it's crazy. Like recently in my life, I've heard of a few people who like old friends of mine from the past that just, I'm just like out of nowhere. I go on Instagram, or I get contacted from another old friend, and they're like, did you hear so-and-so just got into an absolutely crazy accident, and, you know, is like, has been in a coma for a number of days. Or, you know, I heard of my friend's friend, just, you know, completely healthy, young, gets in a car, gets railed from the side, and then just dies. And it's really crazy.
I mean, it's awful.
Yeah, like hearing your story, and it just makes you realize, like, I'm sitting here right now, and I could just walk outside, whatever I'm doing after this, and that could be it, you know. And it's so easy to be like, oh, you know, like life is precious, and et cetera, and we have to appreciate every moment, which we do, of course. But to actually do that, you know, we're humans at the end of the day, and it's so easy to grow accustomed to the things we have. So like even our most precious blessings, they become like our foundation line that we just expect. So if I come home and I have like a nice place, or even a place that's like secure, I don't want, like, after a little bit, I start to like numb that down. So you know, that happening to you, and you know, being alive today, and that was like during a time period where you were like bombing a lot more, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I was coming out of the tail end of like I had a short, I think a relatively short but focused stint of like painting a lot on, on the passenger trains in my city. Um, was painting a ton of freights, and was doing a lot of street spots, like, but doing nice pieces, like, because that was always kind of like my focus, and tons of track sides, like, street facing kind of lots and places that you could kind of paint something decent, with like kind of the cover of night, and it would be really visible during the day on the main roads and things. And just I was really in the peak of like the peak of my career. That was like kind of what sort of hurt the most. I think just the ego, like the knock to your ego, like where you're like, man, I'm finally at the point where I want to be. And then suddenly it's like you're so exhausted, like you can't do what you were doing at the pace that you expected. And it's confronting for somebody to put all their eggs in one basket, so to speak. It's like, this is all I was. I didn't work another job on the side, really, nothing that that really kind of gave me that boost, like what painting graffiti did for me. So it was really confronting in that respect. I had to kind of go back and really assess, what I was doing. Funnily enough, I went on a road trip like shortly after I'd been in hospital with Revoke, Auger, Zess, and along the way we picked up Next, and we drove from Los Angeles across to Detroit, and we painted a ton. But I was not 100%, man. Like I was really aware, like kind of about probably like 70% into the trip, that I was like at real risk of like winding up in hospital again. If I was trying to maintain the pace of these these other friends of mine who are just such beasts, like the most craziest people to try and keep up with when you just got out of hospital. And it was like there were a few nights along the way where I had to be like, I got to tap out. Like I can't go out and paint 3 or 4 pieces with you guys all night. I need to like sleep, because I was really worried, like that I was going to wind up in hospital in the US, and I'd feel so stupid,
Yeah, yeah.
So
It's crazy
yeah.
because I guess the life of someone who dedicates all their time to writing graph, especially someone who's bombing a lot, um, uh, a lot of those people don't really have like they put so much passion into one thing, and that one thing, as someone on our show once said, like gives you a legacy only when you're dead, and then like you kind of ruin your life for a legacy once you're gone. But it's interesting to think about your case and the case of a lot of your crewmates. You mentioned like Revoke, and just a lot of people who like you came up painting with ended up actually transcending graffiti in a way and entering into like a more, I would call it like a different phase of life, working on art, and still you can still feel that like that graph that like graffiti foundation. What do you have to say about I guess my first question is, how did you go from painting and bombing into making more types of finer types of art?
I mean, I think there was a little bit of a zeitgeist around that time, and I put it down to things that were happening. If we look at that era, like 2008, 2009, you've got like the first primary flight events happen during the Art Basel Miami week, in Wynwood. We see this kind of shift at that time, to sort of embracing more like the large scale mural thing. And there's a lot of crossover that starts to happen between people that paint graffiti traditionally, people that have studio practices and are pursuing fine art, and also people who we would deem as kind of more like street artists and part of that movement, and contemporary artists who are sort of suddenly really focused on wanting to be outside and be a part of what we're doing. as we're kind of like suddenly a whole lot of us looking at what they're doing and wanting to be where they are. And there was a kind of a passing at the gallery door, so to speak. I don't know if a huge amount of knowledge got exchanged, not as much as probably should have between all those parties, but there's definitely a fusion of things that kind of made like kind of a new movement, so to speak. I also think it can't be understated like how influential Revoke is as a person, like along the way, whatever Revoke was kind of doing. And especially like back in this is the era where blogging was still kind of the dominant thing. Like I remember when I went to Miami in 2010 with all of my friends from New Zealand from TMD. I had just signed up for an Instagram like that week. So that's right at the beginning of the Instagram move where everything went off, like kind of being on a desktop computer and people looking at blogs, And Revoke's blog was like, it was super influential. I know most people checked his blog like every day, like, and whatever he said, kind of agree with him or not, like, he was definitely like a tastemaker, and whatever music he was checking and whatever kind of contemporary art he was starting to look at and appreciate and stuff, like kids were listening to him. And the biggest shift I saw was like, as opposed to like, like when we were coming up, this kind of like this kind of thing of like, okay, we're going to do graffiti for X amount of time and then we're going to do it till we can't for whatever reason. And then we're going to kind of segue into the art thing because that just seems like a natural transition to do once, all of these kind of forces that are against you when you paint graffiti, kind of get too heavy. Whereas I think like in that era, there were people that were barely painting graffiti that then were like, I want to be a contemporary artist, like from the get, and we're kind of looking at all of us, I think. And I think a lot of us were also kind of, following closely behind our friends that were like, having success, seemed to be having success in this kind of area and kind of finding their identity and way, and it was just an interesting time, you know what I mean? It's like I always wanted to make art. Like I like really always like put creativity first. Like to me, painting graffiti, like I know for a lot of people it's more like an extreme sport. It's something that has a whole different set of kind of rules and parameters, it's totally separate from like doing art, you know what I mean? Like, and for a lot of people, it's also about lifestyle. Like the lifestyle element is like really huge. Like, like on our side of the world, and, I've met American writers like this too, is really connected to being a criminal, like stealing, to make your money or selling drugs to make your money, living a completely alternative lifestyle, getting money by totally alternative means to just do this thing, but that was not ever me. Like for me, my like if I stole because I had to keep creating. Like I just wanted to paint at a certain pace, you know what I mean? It was like nothing to do with like the thrill of stealing. Like I would have rather had not, you know what I mean? But but I just loved the art so much that I was going to do whatever I had to do, So when all these possibilities and things open up and people start like actually like having creative careers off of the back of their reputation and everything, that's like the most exciting shit for me, like I was like, oh, and I jumped headfirst into the opportunity, it's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to do everything. Like I want to paint big murals. I want to do gallery shows. I want to make prints. I want to, explore fine art to the fullest, and be a part of that. And as you say, keeping that kind of connection to graffiti is really important, And I've strayed away and come back. I always come back. The graffiti aesthetic attitude, the DIY kind of mentality, the sampling kind of aspect of like just hip hop culture in general, all of that. It's just that whole ethos just informs everything I do, and a lot of my friends, as you say.
Yeah, I think that one thing that's important for people doing things such as that is to really, you know, foster this culture inside of themselves of like, you know, ingenuity, making something out of nothing, just creating, because that's really what the like history and culture of not just graffiti, but the time period in what I think of in New York City when all of this stuff was being like created, that can still exist. It's like these are the people who made it what it was and to kind of define this culture. However, we have people in our modern day era, like you were saying, like Revoke, who are making a whole new definition of things, or a crew that I like to point to is like Iraq Crew, making a whole new definition of how you do things as well. And that's like really what, in my opinion, keeps the spirit alive. One of the things that I feel like is such a question to ask you is like, so you're from New Zealand. You came up at first painting graffiti in New Zealand, you know, painting the transit system in New Zealand, but then you find yourself in you know, like West Coast, getting down with MSK, painting with people like Auger. How did that all happen? How'd you get down with MSK, moving here and meeting the set of people who you ended up meeting, you know?
Well, like to go back like a long way, like to 2000, 99, 2000, I actually came up with a concept like for a festival. Like I had seen in like European graffiti magazines that they had like these graffiti jams, like the original Meeting of Styles and Wiesbaden and stuff like that. And I saw photos from this and I thought, man, that like seems amazing. Like what if, you know, I was always of the mentality that whatever I saw happening overseas, I was like, New Zealand needs that, you know, because it's like we're the most isolated country in the world. Like literally, geographically, we're so far away from everything. So I came up with an idea to like start bringing like the artists that I really admired, you know, over to paint live, you know, in Aotea Square, which is in the center of the city in Auckland. And it was kind of one of those really organic things where I started with kind of one set of artists, and sort of each sort of, you know, subsequent like group of artists that would come out would kind of recommend people, you know. So like initially, like the first festival I had Lumit come out, you know, and then the following year was like Lumit, Dime, and then Cantu, you know, and then Cantu became someone I became really connected to, and he was really, really like great to us. And shared a lot of knowledge and connections, you know, and then I met Atom, Smash, Wow 123, like all these people. So it was very German focused for me for quite a while. But in 2000 and I say it was 2002, I ended up bringing the first artist out from the US that I brought out. Like Cantu actually linked me with Bates, you know, from Denmark.
Yeah.
But the same year, we also brought out Ewok from MSK, and Totem from Atlanta came out as well that year. But Ewok stayed like a little bit longer than everybody. Like he was sleeping on our couch, you know, at our place. We lived in the shittiest place. Like it was this rat infested house. There was only two houses on the street. It was like us and a brothel next door, and our house was like sideways, like almost falling over, and like you used to have to fight with rats, you know, would be in the kitchen and they'd get in through under the sink and get through the cutlery drawer, and they'd be fighting you for like your sandwich. Like you know, you leave your sandwich ingredients on the bench for too long, you know, you hear the rattle of cutlery and head out and there's like a rat, like a massive rat. It was like the worst place. But he slept there on the couch and really clicked with him. And I think that friendship, like kind of establishing that friendship with him kind of really went a long way, you know, because when I started networking with some of the other guys in MSK, and I would say that probably happened around 2004, 2005, started talking with Rhyme and Revoke on MySpace. Like we were messaging each other on MySpace. Revoke was aware because I used to publish a magazine as well, and Tower Records used to import our magazine, and so people started to become a little bit more aware of like the New Zealand scene. And Revoke had racked like the magazine. He was like, "Oh shit, you know, you're the dude that made that. I like that magazine. It's really great." It's like, "Oh, awesome." So you know, that was cool. I think like Casey Eclipse started like reaching out because he was starting to make a lot of moves with the known gallery thing and the seventh letter thing, and started to like reach out to like artists around the world, kind of trying to build like a bit more of a kind of global network, and started inviting me to contribute like, you know, little pieces for like shows and bits and pieces. Like, and I didn't even really know what I was doing like on a fine art side of things, but I was like, yeah, I'll make a little thing and send it over or whatever. And then I went to Germany in 2006 and was with Atom and Wow, Cantu, and Smash. And they got invited to this festival that Arrow was organizing in Brighton. And we all flew over, and Rhyme, Revoke, Sever, Persuade was there with them. There was a bunch of people. Blade was painting at that festival. It was like pretty cool. And I like traveled over with those guys. And then because I wasn't like invited per se, and there was no budget, like, because those guys were like the Montana rider team, the German Montana rider team, whatever, and I wasn't like really able to stay at their hotel, whatever. Arrow opened up his house for like basically all the stragglers to stay at, and Revoke and everybody was staying there at the same house, and I was sleeping there. And so yeah, we all just kind of like ended up kicking it, hanging out, getting along really well. Ryan was like his typical like abrasive self. When I met him, it was like, I was like, because he had been the most friendly and reached out the earliest, but then you meet him in person and he's just can be such an abrasive character. You know, I mean, he's a very East Coast kind of guy, you know, in his way, you know, so, but, you know, like Revoke was like immediately like friendly and really encouraging, you know. And from that point, we just maintained like really consistent contact. And then it was like 2008, it was like 2 years later, I finally made my first travel to the United States. So I went to New York. Like obviously like my connection in New York has always been Wayne. You know, like Wayne was just the guy. Still is to me. Like he's just kind of like everyone I met in New York, I met mostly through him or Rhyme. And so I went out to New York and we stayed like with all the COD guys, we're hanging out with all of them and painting. And then we flew out to LA. And when we got to LA, it coincided right with the time where Revoke like had his first big arrest. It was like the kind of like the arrest that started that whole kind of avalanche of like legal woes that he kind of dealt with for the next decade. But he literally like, because he wasn't answering the phone. Like my friend from New Zealand also flew in to meet us there in LA, and then he was like leaving all these panic messages on my phone, like, oh shit, you know, like are you sure your friend's cool? Like he's not gonna like stand us up or whatever, because I'm like trying to hit him up and he's not answering. And then we flew from New York, and then we landed, and I got a message saying, oh, it's all good, I found him, he's got a crazy story to tell you. He had just got out of jail. He'd been like, the sheriffs from a whole other county came across and like raided his house in LA and took him away. And yeah, that's kind of like so funny. So my friendship with him kind of always kind of coincided with that whole, all of that bullshit he kind of had to go through. But yeah, I think we just built good friendships from there. That like when we went to his house that day that we arrived, or that afternoon, Trav was there, Orga was there. They had just been put in MSK, like, you know, within a couple of months of them being put in the crew. Mm-hmm. You know, Zess lived with them at the time, so met Zess, clicked with him real well. Met Alloy the first time on that trip. Met Paisa the first time on that trip. Like met a bunch of them, and yeah, they're just like, I don't know, the mentality, man. Like LA guys are real different, you know. And they're different to the East Coast cats. Like, you know, they've got their own kind of thing. It's their own universe, you know, and approach and attitude. But they're very akin to the mentality that I grew up with in Auckland. I don't know if it's just being Pacific, like cities with the same communities of people kind of drifting, you know, and a bit of overlap there. Something about the attitude, you know. Maybe we just had more Californian influence, you know, to our graffiti and everything. So it was just being with them and being there in Southern California felt like home, you know.
I mean, painting LA is just completely different, I feel, from painting anywhere else. And I have like a lot of friends in LA, and just like what I've heard from everyone who's painted out there is just, the same story. You have to be aware of the gangs more than you have to be aware of the cops. That the gangs will walk up on you and it'll be like a movie set. And I know that you've had some experiences with that painting out there. So yeah, what can you say about that?
Well, it was kind of like one of those things. Like when we got there, it was really at the height of like when like Revoke was like, I mean, he hasn't lived in LA for a really long time now, So I don't know if he would call himself or consider himself an LA guy anymore. But at that moment, to me, my perception at least was like he was like the most LA dude, like because on one hand he was doing all this crazy graffiti stuff, but then at the same time, the social side of things, like when they were partying, there were so many kind of semi-famous and famous people around, and they just kind of live this life that kind of like it's almost like what we kind of perceived coming from this little island that these MSK guys might be like. They were exactly like doing exactly what we thought they were, and it was pretty wild. Like we got there, and on the first night we ended up like going out on the town, and there were all these like, kind of reality star people around partying and stuff, and the drinks were free, and it was very kind of lavish and kind of like, Hollywood. But then, like within 12 hours, we had a run-in with the Avenues in Highland Park, when we were painting at the spot that, I mean, the spot's not even like a spot anymore, but it was kind of like this weird vortex where they always had trouble. Like every time they painted this wall, there was some sort of conflict or issue. I think there's like a community garden there now. It's like, I mean, Highland Park's changed a lot, but yeah, we just got rolled up on because there was like an altercation at the wall, and with this guy who was just like drunk at 10 in the morning and acting a fool. And he was running around the neighborhood kind of yelling for help, and like anyone that would happen to hear him, they could take it how they wanted. They could take it on face value and listen to him. And what he was saying was kind of stupid, like because they were like he was like telling them there was a gang of white guys cruising around beating up Mexicans or something, so they all rolled up. They blocked us more or less in the alleyway. There are guys on either side, so we weren't going anywhere. And this, OG looking dude comes up. He was pretty intense. He had like Avenues tattooed across his top lip, and it was, for me, it's weird because it was so surreal. It's like you say, it's like a movie. Like all of the slang and all of the kind of the swagger and kind of character of these people was like stuff I'd only seen on TV, in the movies. And so I was kind of like not understanding the seriousness of the situation. I was like laughing like the whole time. And I don't know if it was like a nervous reaction as well, but I just thought the whole situation was so ridiculous, And then my friend's like, oh, they got guns. And so I realized, oh shit, they do. They all have guns. Like this is actually like kind of serious, But we were talking with them, and they kind of were looking at this group of people, this eclectic group of people. There was people from, I think, like we had like who was there? It was like Sess and Med were there. There were like, Orga, and Orga's like, he's half black, half Mexican. There's like basically my friends are all Polynesians. Like there's people with English accents, like Ara was there, Surim from Australia. There's a ton of like people of all different like, ethnic backgrounds from different parts of the world with different accents. And this gang leader dude was like looking at us, and he was like, you guys don't look like any sort of fucking gang I've seen. He's like, what is going on here? Like, so Revoke started explaining, like, we're actually artists, like, we're painting this mural, we're not a gang, And then the guy was like, oh, and this dude that'd been acting a fool kept acting a fool. And I guess this guy was smart enough to see it. And he's like, you know what? This guy's an idiot. He's like, he's going to keep being an idiot. And he goes, so it's up to you guys to be tolerant and just ignore him. You know what I mean? Because I don't need fucking like you guys beating dudes up in my neighborhood, so chill the fuck out. And everyone was like, okay. And then like, later on, the dude that got beaten up came back, And he was all happy. He was like, I just wanted to be your friend and all this stuff. And then the gangsters, like a whole bunch of them came back with their kids, and they all had like lawn chairs and stuff and were sitting around watching us. And it turned into a super cool day. But that kind of first 12 to 24 hours in LA, I got to experience a little bit of the whole gamut of what it has to offer.
Of them ended up, having children of their own, and I hear the same thing from everyone, which is like it's a life-changing thing, and you don't really know how it's going to be like until you're there. And like talking to my friends, like in my personal life and shit, I realized that a lot of them are very unsure of whether or not they want to have a child, and many even point to just no. So was that kind of the flow that you were on, or was this something that you knew you wanted for a while?
I mean, I've always wanted to be a parent. Like I've always wanted to have a kid. I don't know if I want to have more than one kid. I don't know if my wife wants to either. Like one right now seems like sufficient, for where we're at in life, and what we can do to ensure a really good life for her. But I always thought that I would be a parent. I'm just kind of like thankful in a lot of ways that it didn't happen for me at another stage in my life when I was younger. Because we might be looking at a scenario where I might have been like unable to do the things that I'm doing now, or my wife also wouldn't have been in the position to provide the way that she is right now, where she is able to give us like a pretty comfortable life in the sense that we have benefits and security, like I can go get glasses because I need glasses, which I could never do before. I can go to the dentist when I need to go to the dentist. Like I cut my hand open the other day and had to get stitches, and I went to the emergency room, and I didn't get hit with like a staggering bill, because prior, like in all the years that I've been here in the US, I mean, I've avoided any type of like anything like that, like it's all been deferred until we found ourselves in this exact position, and it would have been irresponsible in a lot of ways. I mean, it's, I didn't grow up with much, like I had teenage parents, my mom was 16 when she got pregnant. She was still in her second to last year of high school. She got kicked out for being pregnant. She was 17, just turned 17 when she had me. My parents' relationship didn't last very long. They were split up by the time I was like 18 months. And, like a lot of those things, like those lessons I learned from like their life experience and everything, and the things that they've imparted on me, like, and that I've seen them go through, like struggling as young people to get a footing, like just to get like stable careers and education for themselves, to buy a home, to do all the things that they've managed to do. A lot of that was deferred and happened like much later for them from being young parents, and there's just like a part of me that knew like, man, I have to make sure I've kind of got my shit together a little bit more,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe just mentally where I'm at, like I don't know, like it's super rewarding, man. It's real crazy, hey, like I just sit and watch my kid do all sorts of funny stuff all day, and just they're like little sponges. So everything that they're kind of learning, you sort of are reminded, damn, I need to like really be the most genuine version of myself, for this person,
Yeah, and it also, I feel like your situation speaks to the different chapters in life, because you spent 20 years painting illegal graffiti that people didn't want to see, and people meaning like the general public don't really want to see. And then you feel strange as you start getting into doing more like mural work, doing murals that are 11 stories high, wanting to do 100 200 a year, which is ridiculous, because if something's 11 stories high, how do you, that 100 to 200, that's crazy.
Well, I mean, with the murals, realistically, you're gonna a good year, you're gonna paint probably 10, I reckon, across a whole year. I think most artists, like probably most of kind of the mural artists I know, they probably aren't painting much more than that in a year. And that's a big year, because logistically, like what's involved in doing that, like it's crazy. Like for a short time, my wife came in and painted with me. And when we were living in New York, like we were supporting ourselves like through me painting murals, but it often meant we had to travel out of New York a lot, you know, to other parts of the world to basically pay our New York rent, which was like astronomical. You know,
Where in New York did you live?
we lived in Clinton Hill,
Okay.
you know, so it was a nice area, man. I really loved it. Like it was the only area I lived there. Like she moved in with a friend from California when she first got there a year before I moved there, and moved in with her like pretty much straight away. And it's the only area that we lived. And I just honestly I loved it, man. I never wanted to really leave. Like I would have been happy staying there. I don't know if we would have been in a position to have a family there. But you know, especially right just before the pandemic hit and everything, I was in my stride. Like I just loved it. I finally felt like it was home. Like it's a hard city to adjust to when you're not from there, and especially when you come from a small place like I do. You know, like everybody knows each other in my city. Like it's a city of like less than 2 million people. You know, but people are all aware of and know each other, and like the scenes are like really easy to kind of navigate. And then you come to New York, and the anonymity is like both liberating, and also it's sometimes the loneliest thing. Like, you know, you can feel both things at the same time in that city. You can feel like you can feel comfortable just to fucking like cry on the train when you're so frustrated with life and no one gives a fuck, you know. But also they see you, but they've all been there. They've all had a cry on the train. You know, like they've all got frustrated with life at some point, you know. like I've seen so many people crying on the train, you know, like just having a moment, and I'm just like, damn, I feel that. I felt that way, you know.
Yeah,
It was
absolutely.
it's a tough place, man. It's like the thing I loved about the East Coast and New York specifically was nobody makes any false promises. You know, people are quite genuine and very honest, and they don't overextend, you know, like before they know you. Like they have to really see what you're about and see, you know, that you're a person that means what they say, you know. Whereas like, you know, LA is kind of like a place where people are really like dreaming about all these things all the time. Oh, wouldn't it be cool to do this and that? And people love hanging out, socializing, and talking about these things they're going to do that never happen, you know, half the time, you know. And people in LA will tend to tell you like, oh, I'm going to do this for you, I'm going to do that for you, blah, blah, blah. New Yorkers never do that. Never. You know, like they've got such a totally different mentality, you know, and I grew to really love it. Like I was like, man, you always know where you stand with people here. Like you really do. And they just tell you. Like they just will tell you what they think, you know, and they won't hold back. And I heard someone say like New York is like the city that you move to be like your very best. You know, that's a tough place to make it, you know, and it's like a place where you go to be your very best, you know, which is definitely true, you know, because like even professionally and like working, you know, with the agency that I work with out there for like mural and illustration projects and things, like the level of like professionalism and what was expected of me was just like, it was the best. I loved it. I loved working and operating at that level. Like I thrived, you know. Once those doors started to open for me, I was like, fuck, this is what I've always wanted, but could never have, you know, coming from where I come from, you know. So,
Yeah.
you know, it was a shame to leave, man. I didn't do much on the graffiti side of things there too. I painted like a ton of abandos, like mostly with Host. I like paint a lot with Host. He's, you know, still a very close friend.
Yeah, Host is a good person.
Yeah.
We had him on the show a while ago, honestly, at this point, but super cool talking to him and meeting him, you
Yeah.
know. Absolute
Yeah.
Brooklyn legend.
Yeah. All of those guys, this whole crew are just like the best dudes. Like I really like, you know, and they're all old friends that grew up together too. So like they have that kind of chemistry, and the way that they mock each other and joke and shit is just like it's such a good thing. It's magic.
Yeah. Well, honestly, it seems like you have a really good thing going, especially with your situation with raising your daughter and stuff. Being able to spend a lot of time with her, I feel like that's not something that everybody gets to do with their child because of the nature of the society that we live in. You have to be working, and sometimes two, never mind just one, can't be enough to like pay rent and pay the lights and pay all that shit. So very happy to hear that you're doing well, man, and honestly just wishing you nothing but positive wishes.
Oh, I appreciate it, man. No, I mean, I honestly, I don't take it for granted. That's for sure, But I'm looking forward to also, like my next phase of work too, because a lot of things have been brewing, and I'm really ready to bring that out and to show that I'm starting to take baby steps into sculpture.
Oh, cool. That's awesome.
And the whole AR thing, like I've given a lot of thought to like the way that AR can really be used in conjunction with what we're doing as graffiti artists and muralists in some ways that I think would be a very powerful intervention, compared to the way things have been going, which is sort of increasingly pulling people, into the virtual world. I see like a lot of potential for these technologies to pull people back out into the actual physical world, to experience, and I'm a history buff, and I love exploring like the deeper context and everything, and I think that there's the ability to kind of now augment graffiti in a way that kind of can explain context and history process, because one thing that young people like, and this is one thing from being incredibly on social media over the last couple of decades that I've learned, is that the main thing that young people are really interested in is process. Most young people get on and look at people's Instagrams and listen to podcast interviews, and they all kind of absorb this media because they're so hungry to learn. And I think where we don't live in a graffiti kind of like reality anymore, where like kind of necessarily you have these like larger crews that kind of really school and educate younger people or bring them up in a lineage of style like they used to. Like if you look at like kind of that whole kind of lineage of like New York crews, like you kind of look at that kind of, that kind of FBA, sort of TC5, FC, IBM, like you see a kind of like a branch of a tree, you know what I mean? It's like, and you see that on the West Coast with like AWR and MSK, and you see the older guys to the younger guys, and you see a connection, but you don't see that so much with younger writers, so I think that we have a responsibility as people of my generation now, as we're getting older, to impart a lot of knowledge, and start sharing with younger people, so they can kind of really learn and feel those connections, albeit a different way, because we're we don't just live in our neighborhoods anymore, we live in the world.
No, that's 100% true with all the technology that's coming up. I feel like you can hate on it or you can love it, but at the end of the day, it's something that's coming, and that's just a human thing to be always going more with technology. Some people want less. It is what it is, but I think that all we could do as people is use the technology that is here to make our lives better and just have a more, I guess, advantageous fucking society, or like advantageous community. There's no point in just hating it, and at the end of the day, it sucks because if your personal preference is to not want to use that shit, it is in your right to do so, and I guess I can also understand that aspect as well. However, the reality is that the world will leave you behind, and then before you know it, you won't really know how to function in this world that is so dependent on these things. And me personally, like I enjoy it because look, I'm having this conversation with you right now, and this is my first time, I guess, meeting you, talking to you, and through this medium of technology, like we on our end have been able to share a bunch of stories and create a platform and do all this thing and get people together and share our ideas, and then it just goes on and on from there. I mean, you know, we've been talking a lot about like people in MSK and their artistic pursuits and how they're pushing the levels. But even going far back as to mentioning Revoke's blog, well, that's something that's, you know, using a technology that then inspires so many people. I remember when Revoke and Augur had this video on YouTube that's probably still out of them painting, and it starts and like they're doing huge outlines on this like tanker type of thing, and then they lay it flat because like there's a car or something coming by. I watched that so many times, and it influenced my life a lot, you know, and it kind of made me just more and more intrigued. And I'm over here on the northeast coast. They're all the way in the west coast, yet they don't even know. No one knows I'm watching this shit. Never mind all the other people who are watching it. And like, it's because of this technology that we're able to share. It's like writing a letter to someone, except that letter is going to travel so much faster and a lot wider. So I personally appreciate it, and look forward to seeing what comes of it. Of course, everything comes with negative. But even books they thought was going to be negative because it was going to destroy our memory or whatever it is. Like, and that's true. Like, it probably did fucking destroy our memory. We don't even realize it. But like, I'm grateful for it, and I'm grateful that there's people like you who are using it to push your own limits. You know, advance yourself as an artist, and just, I guess, make the world like a better place. So respect to you for that.
Well, you know what's interesting, man? Like, because I reckon like somebody that doesn't get enough credit for that kind of big shift in kind of online video content, but Casey Eclipse, once again, you know, like, because he was producing those Seventh Day Project videos, and that was right at that kind of shift when DSLR cameras, you know, became incredibly accessible, and the video kind of capabilities of them, you know, were like such that you couldn't really kind of, you know, from a layman's point of view, you couldn't really differentiate, you know, between like what was shot on like a 5D Mark II to like, you know, on like what would have been like probably before like a $20,000-$30,000 camera, you know. And that was like a big shift, man. Like, honestly, I don't think that my career would have taken the trajectory it did if I had not watched those videos and immediately been inspired to make video content. Because Burst and I started making video content, and they were like skate videos. It was like a highlight reel, you know. So what you're seeing is a montage of us landing all these flares and all these kind of cool, tricky kind of things. And, you know, like a whole lot of people ran with that after us too, you know, like Kosophos, who's in our crew, like same thing. Like, I mean, he's just so naturally gifted, and he's such a physical painter that, you know, he saw a video, you know, as a perfect medium to kind of show just how technical he was, you know, or is. And now, you know, there's tons of people that, especially with like things like Instagram, that kind of like the algorithm kind of inherently favors video content, you know, like have built entire careers for themselves using that approach. And once again, you see that that's just a whole bunch of people kind of riffing and vibing off of each other, and a shift in technology, you know, and a different platform for sharing, you know. And that's what it is. It's like we can be yelling at the sky, you know, oh, it was better back in the day, but it's like, this is just what it is. So, you know, as you say, you've got to kind of you know, definitely maybe history doesn't always favor the earliest adopters or the innovators. It's usually a few people down the line that usually get the traction, you know, but with every shift, you know, becomes a different mode to kind of communicate, you know. And you know, it's what keeps things evolving and progressing.
Absolutely. I want to say thank you so much for coming on the show and speaking and sharing your stories and your ideas. Respect to you, respect to your crew, and like I said earlier, nothing but positive wishes for you and your life path and your family. And if you're ever in New York, you know, hit me up. We're definitely, I would love to meet you in person. And same thing, if I'm coming to Portland, I'll shoot you over a message. But yo, thank you so much.
No worries, man. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Yo, 100%. Yo, peace. Thank you so much.
Cool. Take care, man.
Later.